pleasure of Selina Kirkham leading our session today. So Selina is a chartered accountant. She qualified with Ernst & Young, and in 2013 she co-founded Totus Environmental, which is a waste and recycling business.
Hello there.
Hi, you're right.
I've got so many packages.
Oh, somebody's got a bit of background noise. Have you? There you go. Thank you.
I just muted them. Sorry.
Someone having a bit of a chat in the background. So yeah, I was just saying that Totus is now grown and is probably turning over about 18 million, very successful organisation. Selina's also studied psychology in the past, and the session today is going to be focusing on the dynamics that lead to conflict, how we can positively resolve conflict, and how we can have positive communication. So yeah, I'm not going to say too much more. I'm just going to pass across to you, Selina. If you have got questions throughout the course of the session, Selina said she's happy just to address those as they come up, because as always, we do want it to be an interactive session where everyone's getting involved. So either just raise your hand or pop it in the chat box, and I can just keep an eye on that and introduce you, and then you know, you can ask your question. So yeah, thank you so much, Selina. I'll pass over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris. So can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So this session is about how we maintain relationships but whilst maintaining productivity. And it focuses on the softer side of being a finance director or CFO. And is something that's often overlooked as we build our technical skills. So I'm hoping will be useful to everybody today. So I wanted to talk about something called groupthink. Now, it's really important that we are able to have differences of opinion and sit in a room and talk about things to make the best decisions. And it's important that we don't have something called groupthink. And the reason I'll just explain what groupthink is in the next slide, but essentially, it's really important that we have differences of opinion, that we also know what can trigger conflicts, what boundaries are, which often are the things that cause conflict in the first place, and different techniques that we can use to handle that. The techniques will vary. Sometimes you'll have conflict with somebody that maybe is being a little bit manipulative. And you'll know the signs of that, but sometimes you'll have people that are genuinely upset or angry, and there's different techniques to deal with those things. So let's talk about groupthink, and there's some great studies that I'm going to share with you now, which will really make you think about this. So groupthink occurs when everybody thinks the same, and often people hire in their likeness. So they want people that are like them, which is not always a great thing, because we do need different perspectives, because often it's our differences that create the best decisions. So if we have groupthink, employees may feel uncomfortable sharing what they think. They might think they'll get shot down. And over time, this can weaken products or services that we offer. And it might mean that one person is making the decision without any challenge, and that results in the wrong decision being followed by everybody. I wanted to point to a study by Ash, which some of you may be familiar with, in the 1950s. So Ash conducted a line experiment, a vision test. So he said, which is the longest line? So obviously, if we were looking at a group of lines, we could all tell which is the longest line. And what he did was he put a load of actors in the room and one real participant, and all of the actors chose a different, not the longest line, basically. And what he found was, in 75% of cases, even though they could see which was the longest line, the participants went along with the actors and chose what the group had chosen. And if you think about that, if you do have a group think in an organisation and it's the wrong decision, then 75% of people won't challenge that. So it's really important that people feel comfortable with conflict and discussing their views. This is another interesting point around high-performing teams. So studies show that when you have consensus in a team or a board, it increases performance. And that's great, provided that the decisions made aren't along the lines of groupthink and you're not going along with the wrong decision and you've got an environment external to the business that's changing all the time, regulations are changing, and perhaps the company isn't moving in line with the market, and nobody's saying, hang on a minute, have we thought about this? So devil's advocate is a great technique for challenging views and just saying, oh, have we thought about, X, Y, Z? It improves critical thinking. But what studies have shown is that when people challenge other people's views, participants are less likely to want to work together in the future. And so that's, really important that on the one hand, people want to work with people that think alike, but on the other, it's really important that great decisions are made through differing opinions. And so how you manage the relationships when offering alternative views is critical. Because obviously the best position would be to have consensus and also critical thinking. I wanted to talk about an author called Patrick Lencioni. Some of you may have read his book. I really recommend that you do, called The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. And he goes through the first thing to build a relationship with anybody is to build trust. And trust is where you feel you can be vulnerable with someone, and that you can, speak to somebody without fear of, them pointing out your personal mistakes. And so it's really important that we can relate to each other and speak to each other in a way that doesn't make people close up. But this second point is really the point that I put this slide up for, is we get beyond that stage, but it's mastering conflict. It's how can we work with people that is open and allows us to offer our views and then reach a resolution. And what he says is that if people can't master the first 2 stages, what will happen is they will go into a room and they will say that they agree to something, they will walk out of the room and they'll do something else because they've never committed to it in the first place. And so in that case, you'll get a lack of commitment. And if you get a lack of commitment, then you're not going to get people being accountable for something that they've agreed to. And that affects overall company results. So I just think it's a really great book. He goes through a scenario and really explains this model through storytelling, and I'd really recommend it. So what causes conflict in the first place, and what is the concept of assertiveness? So conflict is caused by overstepping somebody's boundaries. So it could be that you're in a queue and somebody jumps ahead of you. And your boundary is that actually everybody's supposed to stand in line. So we'll go on to boundaries in the next slide, but that's usually the cause of people feeling aggrieved. And it's really important that you communicate in a way that understands that you have your boundaries, but so do other people. And it's really important that you can communicate your view and your boundary whilst respecting theirs. And if you can't, that's where the conflict triggers come. So you can have all kinds of boundaries. So you can have emotional boundaries. This could be where somebody's calling you, telling you all their problems, emotionally dumping on you, and at the end of the call, you feel really drained. It could be around material boundaries. So we often know at work, people get territorial about what belongs to them or what belongs to other people. Time, energy. Some people have a real issue around being early. Some people just want to be on time, and some people are perfectly happy to turn up late. But if you are turning up late and you've got someone that thinks it's being late is turning up on time, then you've got a boundary issue in that relationship. And obviously physical boundaries, mental boundaries, so people putting their views on you and you having a different opinion. So all these boundaries exist. An example I read was around somebody bought a house, and the previous owner had allowed the neighborhood to use his pool, and he decided it wasn't happening, and he fell out with all his neighbors because of that, because that was his boundary. And even if you look on things like Reddit and someone will put a bizarre scenario up, everybody has a different opinion as to what's acceptable. So I wanted to talk about our reaction and conflict itself. And I wanted to bring in the model by Eric Bernes. So he says that we're always in 3 states. And this is really important to understand when working with people, because you need to know which state are they in. Now, 95% of the time you should be in A, which is called adult, but people automatically go into critical parent or child. Child is an emotional state, and it can be positive and negative. And parent is often what we've learned from our parents. So imagine road rage, and somebody's pulled out at you, or you've pulled out on somebody else, and they're really unhappy about it, and they're there honking their horn, doing gestures that might seem patronizing, critical. What are you doing? Why are you driving like that? Have you learned to drive? Have you passed your test? All of those comments are negative parent, they're critical parent, and those trigger an emotional response from people as humans. So if you ever are speaking to somebody in that state, you will automatically force them to go into critical parent back. Well, you've done this, you've done that. I mean, how many times have you had a conversation where you've highlighted something and triggered them to go, well, you've done this, finger pointing, blame. The other thing that you can do is trigger child. So if somebody is in critical parent, it could force them to go into their negative child, often called their adaptive child. And that is the child you were when you were younger. So if you were somebody that liked to punch someone in the face, there is the possibility that in that road rage, you might jump out your car and do that, or swear at them, or do very inappropriate hand gestures according to your adaptive child. You could also be somebody that goes within themselves. And some children will do that and as adults, they'll do that. So you'll often find somebody will be shouty, critical parent, the other person goes within themselves, and they never communicate effectively to resolve the issue. The other sides I'll just briefly touch on are positive parent, and that's where you're caring, nurturing, supportive. That's a great place to be, but you don't want to be in that too long, because, you know, everybody is an adult and they should stand up and, you know, be responsible and accountable for themselves. And you can also have curious child, playful child, called the free child. That is a very positive place to be in terms of relationships. If you can be silly with somebody, have a joke with somebody, and be vulnerable, and we go back to the previous slide of building trust, that is a really good space to be in. So, for instance, if you were being silly with somebody and they turned around in critical parent and rolled their eyes, that would be a really negative dynamic. But if you you know, had a laugh back, it would really build the relationship. And so it's really important to understand where people are and where you are as well. Because if you've got this model and you can understand, oh, I'm in critical parent right now. So I often do that. So when there's, you know, something happens and I realize what state they're in, it means that I can understand how to deal with the situation better. So it's all about respecting boundaries, which can trigger things. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, critical parent gets a very negative reaction, as does the adaptive child as well. So it's really important to be aware of those things and just make sure that you are not in them. And if you see somebody else in them, that you use the techniques we're going to talk about to deal with the situation and de-escalate it. Because as you can imagine, if someone goes into parent, you go into critical parent, that will escalate. If someone's in critical parent and you go into adaptive child, that might also escalate. So if you've got someone in critical parent saying, you've done this, and the adaptive child is to walk away from that situation, they might think, you're not listening to me. You've just walked away. You don't care about the situation, but really that person's just, that is the way that they respond. So often in relationships, that can be an issue. Or if, they're in critical parent and they go into the other adaptive child, which is a bit more volatile, that can get really serious as it escalates. So it's really important to understand where this comes from. So your parent, either nurturing or critical, comes from your actual parents. So you should always challenge your boundaries in that respect, because if you feel something's been stepped over, is it an okay boundary to have? And I mention that because there was a study by a psychologist that there was a relationship issue, and the woman in the relationship really had a problem with anyone sitting on the bed, which sounds bizarre, amongst other issues. And the psychologist said to her, where does that come from? And it was in the 50s, and she was like, my mum used to say it. And so he said to her, ask your mum why she used to tell you that. And it turned out that she used to invite friends around that from a, shall we say, different socio-economic group. And she had a problem with them sitting on the bed. So that's where it came from. So, on one hand, we should challenge our boundaries, but we should also realize that they're taught and they're automatic. We don't think when we react in parent. And then from the child's perspective, that's very emotional. And I'm sure you've heard of something called fight flight. That is something we go into. And when you're in fight flight, it's an emotional response. There is cortisol, adrenaline running through. And so it's really important to realize when somebody's going through that, because it is it is a kind of historic response to a predator. And so sometimes people can really act out of control when they're in fight or flight. And so it's important to realize when they feel threatened. Adult is a conscious state. To be and to stay in adult is something we have to choose to do every single time. And hopefully these models will help you understand where you are, where other people are. Because if you stay in adult and somebody moves into parent or into child, they will often come back down into adult eventually. If you are rational, and what defines adult is you should always be trying to find a solution. So if you're working with somebody and you find that you're not finding a solution, have a look at the dynamics and whether you're an adult, they're an adult, and because that will be why you're not finding a solution. And to be honest, Eric Bernes actually goes further and talks about the patterns of behavior, the roles that people play, and he calls it the games that people play. And often as humans, he identified that there's certain games that humans play with each other, and you'll never find a solution to them. So one of them, for instance, is if you're an alcoholic, often the way to stop being an alcoholic is to go and lead on an Alcoholics Anonymous, can't get my words out, anonymous forum, because teaching people actually helps people as humans overcome something. And usually when they stop doing that, it actually triggers alcoholism again. But there's all kinds of relationships and patterns of behavior. One of them is called kick me, and it's very strange. You know, psychology is a strange thing. The human mind is a complex thing. But sometimes when people feel a lack of self-worth, they often want to confirm that, which is a strange thing to kind of put out. And they'll play games to confirm that. But anyway, we won't go into that. But it's really important that you stay an adult, and that you're always problem solving. I wanted to talk a bit more about fight flight. I don't know if any of you have been in a situation where someone's completely lost it, and you're kind of looking at the situation and you're thinking that's not really an adequate response. Now, it could be that their boundaries have been crossed multiple times, and actually that point was the straw that broke the camel's back. And you know, therefore you're seeing a response to all the previous triggers. Or you could also find that actually it is a fight-flight response. Something about that situation has triggered some early memory. So people that have often been through trauma as children have fight or flight triggered, and they're quite reactive. They have this triggered constantly, and it's something that you have to overcome. But this is a physical reaction. You've got cortisol, you've got adrenaline running through your body. It takes some time for that to leave. Your pupils dilate, your heart accelerates. So if you find that somebody is in this state, you have to think how you respond to that, and not to take it personally. You have to always think about where people are coming from if you are to build a relationship with them, and to get to know their boundaries, and to respond appropriately by not being in the situation yourself, but observing it using tools like this to think, actually, this has nothing to do with me. And so how do you control your emotions? Because it's very difficult. As I said earlier, someone being a critical parent, think about how you feel when there's road rage. Your heart starts to pump, and it's very easy to resort to one of the automatic reactions rather than staying conscious. So a good way to kind of overcome that is to be compassionate about your relationships with other people, and remember that you have a different boundaries to them. What an action to you might not mean the same to somebody else. And so you should consider and get curious about what that might mean for them. And to do that, you should look at a pattern of behavior over time, and just what that really means before making judgments. I enjoy meditation, and one of the things that I find really useful that I took from that is a Zen technique. So sometimes when people have really triggered you, and you know, it is okay, it's a normal response to get angry, but it's also important that, you know, you are responsible for your anger and your actions, is to bring yourself to the here and now. And there's different techniques. You know, you could clap, you could pinch your fingers together, something physical that reminds you of the present, of the here and now. So if you click your fingers to bring you back, so you've seen an email, you're really annoyed about it, bring yourself to the here and now, and then think about the future. So Zen talks about past, present, and future. If you're there in the past thinking, this happened, they've just done this, and you're ruminating over it, bring yourself to the present with something physical, and then think about, right, what do I need to do? And that's a really great way to get back into adult and logical thinking. Try and be an observer of the situation and not in the situation. It really helps knowing that Eric Bernes model, because when you see people in these, you know, positions, it really does help you to realize that, oh, I don't have to be in this. I'm going to step back. Observe with passion, and get curious as to the root cause. Some people are triggered by certain things and memories, so it's really important to understand that. And always remember that being an adult is a logical state. If you are angry in any way or emotional, you shouldn't have the conversation. It really is important to come back when you feel like you can be calm and logical. How do you deal with other people's emotions? So if people are triggered and you're trying to find a resolution with them, and it doesn't matter the scale, it could be, they're not triggered that much. It's just, something that's important to them. I think it's really great to state your intention. It stops it ever being personal. If you say, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve because this is how I think it will affect the company. So by achieving this KPI, this is what it will mean. So often stating your intention is helpful because people aren't always aware of that. The big one, though, is assertive listening. If you make time to listen to what people have to say and fully listen, they will often go along with your perspective. It's when you shut the conversation down, you don't listen, you interrupt, that people will never buy into what you're saying. And that's such a big one. Avoid blame in terms like you, or, you always do this. Don't make it personal. Always try and use I feel and talk about I feel that when there's this behavior, it has this impact on the company. And you can always, and it's important to choose your battles. So think about which battles and which boundaries are worth fighting for. But if it's important to you, you should have the conversation. Assertiveness is not about avoiding conflict. It's about, or differences. It's about actually communicating them effectively. So that you're able to problem solve. So by using I statements. Sorry, I'll just try and go back. Yeah, I statements indicate ownership and don't attribute blame. Nobody likes to say, to feel like they're personally being blamed, and often help build the relationship. So it's a really great technique to master. So how do you deal with people's emotions? These are the techniques. So sometimes, I'm sure most of the time this is not the case, but sometimes people using psychology, and they may not even realize they're doing it, can try and get a rise out of people to make them react, to then get control of them because they feel guilty afterwards. And you need to be aware, and often your intuition is really important. And your intuition is a really powerful thing, because what it is all your subconscious memories that you can't recall right here, right now, that you're conscious of. It's all the things you've learned since a baby that tell you that what's going on now doesn't quite feel right. And often when you have often when your intuition tells you something, it is your previous memories, and you can feel physical responses. You can feel something in your chest or your stomach to intuition. So it's always a good way to know, if you're in a situation maybe that doesn't quite feel right. If you are, then if people are their intention is to trigger something, the broken record technique is perfect for that. So what the broken record technique is, for instance, saying, I can't go to that meeting right now because I've just got to, finish this assignment. And then when they ask again, as soon as I finish this assignment, I'll come to the meeting. Can we have 5 minutes? once I finish this assignment, I'll definitely come to that meeting. And it's saying, politicians use it a lot because the game with a radio presenter is that they're trying to get them to say something that they can use as a soundbite. But in real life, people might be trying to get you to do something that maybe you're uncomfortable with, or a situation. And if you use the broken record technique, you can stay in control. You don't need to, as they repetitively ask, lose your cool, go into critical parent, go into child. You can stay in adult and just repeat what you've said, but in different ways. I hope that makes sense. So a good example is a sales call. So you want to put the phone down on the person trying to sell you something. And so, you can use this technique and keep saying the same thing multiple times until, they lose interest and, move on to somebody else. There are other techniques as well. And the other techniques are around partially or fully acknowledging. And this is for where people are genuinely upset, genuinely angry about a particular thing. So we talked about timekeeping. So if you are running late, these techniques are where you can acknowledge what they're saying, and people are more likely to de-escalate and feel like you're hearing them. If you can acknowledge, how they're feeling. And that can be partially, that can be, and when you use these techniques, you are taking control back, and it stops you getting upset yourself. So you can say, I was late this time, and I do acknowledge that may have caused you to have to wait. I apologize for that. I'll make sure moving forward that, you know what I mean? And it moves the conversation on. And it forces you to keep control of your emotions. And you don't always have to acknowledge that you're responsible for all of it. So a really great technique is often when there's differences of opinion or conflict, you should always be able to say, I'll own my part, but you have to own yours. So I'll accept these things, but you should accept this. So these techniques are really useful. We go back onto listening, and this is one of the main ways really for finding a way through to solve problems, is actually listening to people. People often know when you're not. I'm sure you can see when other people aren't. And a key kind of takeaway is that if people feel heard, they will often go along with your perspective. So it's really helpful. So this is just a overview of all of the techniques. We talked about the I statement earlier. So when handling difficult situations, it's really important to stay in adult. Adult is always trying to solve the problem. Think about your intentions, go back to what you're trying to achieve, and then actively listen. And often our ego can come into play when somebody has a different idea, but really we should be focused on solving the problems. And so try and put that aside with a view to actually listening to what they're trying to say, and maybe, together you can actually come up with the best decision. Use their name. It lets people know that you care about what they're saying. Showing empathy and compassion, really important. Think about your body language and tone of voice. Isn't always what you say. Could be the way that you're coming across. And I don't know if you've ever seen those statistics on how much people hear what you say versus listen, and how much they focus on body language. Avoid words like you, must, or jargon that confuse the discussion. Assertiveness is all about clear communication. And it might be that you need to walk away from the situation and really think about it and understand where you are what you actually think. Maybe you need some time. So you can go back with a really clear communication or position, because it's really important that you know what you want. So a really great idea is you can often negotiate with people. So if your next door neighbour has the music on really loud and it's in the evening, you go around there. Do you go around there? You should, according to assertiveness, if it's important to you, you should go around and obviously ask them to turn the music down. They might say, go away. You might then say, oh, okay, if you can't turn it down now, when can you turn it down for? So you can negotiate with somebody that's maybe being difficult. Oh, okay, well, if you can't do it now, when could you do it for? So trying to get somebody to achieve a deadline or various things, negotiating and knowing your position is helpful to be able to negotiate. And then maybe you compromise and find something that works for you both, even though it's not your ideal position. It's also about respecting their boundaries. Problem solving together is better, to avoid groupthink and to get commitment. It's really important that you set clear boundaries with people. So your boundaries should be communicated consistently. You can't have one day it's okay if you reach that KPI, but the next day it's fine. You've got to be consistent with the boundaries that you are communicating. There, it's often best to walk away. If you ever find that you are in an emotional situation, you won't make the best decisions, you won't communicate effectively, it's much better to walk away. So in summary, conflict and our emotions are normal. Fight, flight, freeze or fawn, there's more, are, natural human responses. Our states are natural human responses, and it's really important that we understand where we are and where other people are. Don't let things build up. It's good to be assertive, provided it's important to you and you're picking your battles. Not everything, should be something that you use these techniques for, but don't let things build up and then escalate at the end. Have clear communication of your boundaries and what's important to you. Listen is just critical. Always focus on finding solutions and what your intentions are. And provided that they're good, people will work with you. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope some of that has been useful to people. I hope it's made you think. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Selena. Well, a lot of it resonates with me massively. I mean, even both personally and professionally. But as you're talking, I think we were saying before we came online, we're speaking with CEOs and senior leaders daily, and a big part of what they're looking for in their sort of board is this ability. Technical skills are all good, but it's more about the person fit, how they respond to fellow directors and how they resolve conflict, really key. So really useful. Thank you. I've definitely got some takeaways from it for sure. I'm still working on my assertiveness, not quite there yet. I was, when you were talking, I tend to do is basically honor other people's boundaries and to the detriment of my own. So I'm really working on that, because then you end up feeling disgruntled and fed up because you're not listening to what you want. So, and that's probably more personally than professionally, to be fair. But anyone else got anything that they'd like to share, add, ask? Obviously we really want to get, your insight. So I don't know if anyone's got anything that they want to.
You can be assertive. So the worst thing around a board table is when no one speaks.
Yeah. There you go. It's definitely given us food for thought. So
I'm happy to kind of, well, I'd like to ask a question actually of Selena, if that's all right. So I completely understand and get what your presentation was about. It's really interesting. I just wonder how you've used it to your benefit, both personally and in your organisation, effectively, to kind of utilise that, and how that's translated in either the culture, on the way that you and the organisation behaves.
So Totus started from a standing start and grew organically. So we had to put systems in as we went along, and maybe the way we started wasn't the processes that we ended up with. We wanted to become more corporate and standardize things. And obviously technology's been changing. So getting people's buy-in to move forward with that is always challenging, especially when people create their own ways of working. So I think one of the main areas really is how you get the top team to commit. So building trust, doing things together, spending time together, having lunches together, and realizing that you've got to build trust with people. And so to do that, you need to spend quality time with people on a personal basis. And then to get commitments, it's really making sure that if you disagree on something, that you keep coming back to that point until you've found a resolution, that things aren't left, because it means that the business can't move forward. That is one of the really important points, because if you don't get it right at the top, it won't filter down into a clear set of objectives for everybody else. And then obviously it's being consistent with the way that those objectives are managed across the business. So the boundaries, so to speak, for the company. So this is what we want to achieve. How do we consistently get that message across to make sure that people understand the message? And then the other way is that people are always triggered by different things as human beings. And when they are triggered, it's important. So I've done this presentation with our management team, and it's really great to understand that people can be triggered and what to do in the situations of realizing people are, because it makes you step away from the situation emotionally, and it means that you're more likely to de-escalate situations and actually get positive outcomes, and it makes people much more understanding. So I think they're the ways in which it's been great for Totus.
Thank you.
Mr. Rolfe, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's not so much a question, but just a piece of wisdom. I can't claim any credit for this. There's a guy called Conrad Lorenz. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him. He was I think it was an animal behavior specialist. And there's this fantastic quote from him, and I've got it written up, which I'm just going to read it, won't take long. Said isn't heard, heard isn't understood, understood isn't agreed, agreed isn't actioned, actioned isn't continued. And for me, that's a brilliant piece about communication. So don't know what you think about that, Selena, but I found that very helpful.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Yeah, makes sense. Paul, anybody else, anything that they'd like to add? I think it's been a really interesting session. I feel like I've got a lot to learn. It's one thing knowing it all and being aware of it, but actually putting it into practice, I think, is where it gets difficult, because if somebody comes at you in an aggressive way and they escalate, your instinct is to get defensive, or, well, for me, I just close down and then I'll agree with everything they say just to get out of that horrible situation. But then that's not resolved it. So I guess it's conflict avoidance that I'm guilty of, which I'm working on. But yeah, as I say, I think just putting all this into practice is the tough bit, isn't it?
Do you know, I actually did an assertiveness course because I just found it really useful. And the trainer on that said, in those circumstances, you have to be brave if it's important to you, you should communicate it. And sometimes the people you're communicating to might not receive it well at that time. But it's important that you remain calm, communicate it, and then walk away from the situation. And you'll often find that they then think about it. And often will all come back having thought about it. And as long as you're coming at it in a non-emotional way to solve a problem, people will usually respond quite well and probably respect your position.
Yeah. Cool. Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate your time. I'm sure we all do, Selena, both the time that's gone into preparing the presentation for today and also delivery. I guess if anyone's got any questions or anything they do want to add, feel free to get in contact with me, and I can put you in touch with you, Selena, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I guess one last thing to mention, I don't know whether you're all on the Guild app. We've got a group which has actually reached 1,007 members, all FDs, CFOs across the UK, and it's basically it's a bit like WhatsApp. You can post questions on there, ask for recommendations, and then your peers will be able to provide that to you. So it's a really great resource if anyone's interested. I think you'll send details, will you, Christiane, after the call? Yeah, you're on mute, but yes, we got that. Fabulous. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Take care.